It was 8 degrees below zero on New Year's Eve, and my stepmother threw me out of the house over a casserole dish. Not a fight, not a scandal. A casserole dish I had accidentally knocked off the counter while reaching for my phone charger. It shattered on the kitchen tile, and she stood there, hands on her hips, looking at me the way people look at something broken they've been waiting to throw away for years. "You've ruined this family long enough," she said. Then she pointed at the front door like I was a dog that had tracked mud across her carpet. My father said nothing. He just sat at the head of the table, fork in hand, eyes on his plate, and let it happen. He always let it happen. One minute I was standing in the warmth of a house I grew up in. The next I was outside on the front steps in a thin flannel shirt, my breath turning white in the frozen Colorado air, listening to the deadbolt slide home behind me. I stood there for a long moment, too stunned to move. Through the frosted window, I could see the glow of the television. The countdown to midnight was already on, the ball slowly descending on screen while my half-brother Derek lounged on the couch with a bowl of chips balanced on his chest. My stepmother, Patricia, was already pouring herself a glass of wine. My father hadn't moved. Nobody came to the door. I pulled my flannel tighter and sat down on the porch steps. The cold crept through my jeans immediately, pressing against my legs like a warning. I had nowhere to go. My apartment lease had ended 2 weeks earlier, and I'd been staying here temporarily while I sorted out a new place. My phone was at 11%. My truck was in the shop. I had $42 in my wallet and a family celebrating the new year 10 feet away behind a locked door. I told myself I wouldn't cry. I was 29 years old, and I had not cried in front of this house since I was 12. That's when the headlights appeared. They came slow and steady up the long driveway, cutting through the falling snow like two pale eyes. Not Patricia's friends, not a delivery truck, a black SUV, clean and expensive with out-of-state plates I couldn't read from where I sat. It rolled to a stop directly in front of the porch, engine idling. For a second, nobody moved. I squinted through the snow. The driver's door opened and a large man in a dark coat stepped out, scanning the yard. Then the back door opened. The man who climbed out was somewhere in his mid-60s. Broad shoulders, silver at his temples, a scar that curved along his left jaw like a crescent. He wore a canvas jacket that looked like it had been to a few different countries and survived all of them. He stopped when he saw me sitting on the steps and something crossed his face, something raw and complicated that I didn't know how to read. "Ethan," he said. Not a question. My name, spoken like it had been sitting in his mouth for a long time. I got to my feet slowly. "Who are you?" He looked at my thin shirt. He looked at the locked door behind me. He looked back at me and his jaw tightened. "I'm your uncle," he said, "your father's younger brother. My name is Cole Merritt, and I have been trying to find you for 6 years. I didn't get back in that house. I didn't want to. I climbed into the back of Cole's SUV, which was warm and smelled like coffee and leather, and I sat there shivering while his driver handed me a heavy blanket without being asked. Cole sat across from me, and for a moment we just looked at each other, two strangers connected by blood and separated by everything else. I knew my father had a brother. It had come up exactly twice in my childhood, both times in arguments I wasn't supposed to hear, both times ending with my father saying Cole's name like it was something he wanted to spit out. Beyond that, the subject was closed. When I asked about him as a teenager, my father told me Cole had chosen a different path. When I pressed, Patricia told me to drop it. I had dropped it. I was good at dropping things in that family. "How did you know where I was?" I asked. Cole leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "Your father's address has been in my file for 3 years. I knew where you were. Getting to you was the problem." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Every time I tried to make contact, something happened. A cease and desist letter from your father's attorney. A wellness check called in on me that tied up my legal team for 2 months. Once, a formal complaint filed with the state bar claiming I was harassing a minor, even though you were 26 at the time." He shook his head. "Your father is not a stupid man. He knew exactly which pressure points to push." I stared at him. "He filed legal complaints to keep you away from me?" "He filed everything he could think of," Cole said, "because he knew that the day I reached you was the day certain things would come to light that he has spent a very long time keeping dark." Through the window, I could see the lights of my father's house, warm and yellow against the snow. I thought about Patricia's face when she pointed at the door. I thought about my father's eyes on his plate. What things? I said. Cole reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, thick and official looking. He set it on the seat between us. When your grandfather passed, he said, he left behind a company, Merit Industrial Supply. He built it from nothing over 40 years. Warehouses in 4 states, contracts with the federal government, roughly $60 million in annual revenue. He nodded toward the document. In his will, he split ownership equally between your father and me. But there was a secondary provision, a trust, set aside specifically for you. I looked at the document but didn't touch it yet. For me. Your grandfather adored you. Cole said simply, you were 7 the last time he saw you in person. He died 2 years later. But before he passed, he set aside a trust valued at just over $4 million to be released to you on your 25th birthday. He paused. You're 29 now. The number landed in my chest like something physical. I never received anything, I said. I know, Cole said, because the paperwork releasing the trust required signatures from both co-trustees, your father and me. Your father signed his portion, with your name. For a second I didn't understand what he was saying. Then, I did. He forged my signature, I said. Cole's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. The trust was released 4 years ago to an account that was not yours. The funds were absorbed into a holding company your father created 6 months before your 25th birthday. By the time I discovered what had happened, the money had been moved 3 times. I pressed my back against the seat. Outside, the snow was still falling, soft and indifferent. Down the driveway, through the lit windows, my father was still sitting at his table, fork in hand, celebrating a new year that had already turned. $4 million. 4 years of struggling. The apartment I couldn't afford. The truck in the shop I couldn't pay to fix. The $42 in my wallet. Why are you here tonight? I asked. Why now? Because tonight, Cole said, I finally have everything I need. We drove to a hotel in Denver, one of the tall glass ones downtown where the lobby had marble floors and the elevator played no music. Cole's assistant, a sharp young woman named Renata, met us on the 14th floor with a folder and a pot of coffee. I sat at the desk in a room cleaner than any place I'd slept in years and tried to process the last 2 hours of my life. Cole sat across from me and began to explain things that rearranged everything I thought I understood about my family. My grandfather had started Merit Industrial Supply in 1979 with a borrowed truck and a handshake deal with a hardware distributor in Grand Junction. By the time he died, it was supplying construction materials to military bases across the Mountain West. Cole had worked alongside him from the beginning, learning the business from the ground up. My father and the older son had come in later, more interested in the financial side, the contracts, and the accounts. When the will was read, the equal split had seemed fair on paper. But almost immediately, my father had begun restructuring the financial accounts in ways that pushed Cole toward the margins. Consulting fees redirected. Contract renewals handled without Cole's input. Legal filings submitted under my father's signature alone as sole acting officer, even though the structure required both. Cole had tried to push back through the company's attorneys. My father responded with personal attacks, allegations of mismanagement, threats. For 3 years, they had been locked in a legal dispute over control of the company while I had been living 20 miles away, completely unaware any of it existed. And the trust? I said. Cole opened the folder and slid a page toward me. This is the release authorization your father submitted 4 years ago. This is your signature as it appears on your driver's license from that year. He placed another page beside it. This is your actual signature from a bank form you filled out around the same time. I looked at both. The forged signature was close, but it wasn't mine. The loops were too even. I wrote in a slight leftward slant my whole life, a habit I'd had since grade school. The forged version tilted right. Our handwriting analyst confirmed it immediately, Cole said. The forgery was good enough to pass a casual review, but not a forensic one. Your father likely assumed no one would look closely enough. He was almost right. Almost, I said. You're here, Cole said. We spent the next day in Cole's attorney's office on the 16th floor of a building on 17th Street. His legal team was thorough and fast and had clearly been building this case for longer than one night. They walked me through each document, each financial record, each discrepancy. Renata cross-referenced dates and account numbers with a quiet efficiency that was almost frightening. The picture that assembled itself over those hours was not a small one. My father had not just forged my signature to steal the trust. He had, over the course of several years, systematically excluded Cole from operational decisions, transferred company assets to entities he controlled alone, and submitted federal contract renewals without proper co-authorization. The forged trust release was the cleanest and most provable piece, but it was not the only one. By 4 in the afternoon, Cole's lead attorney, a woman named Harriet who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke with the precision of someone who charged by the word, told me what the situation meant practically. The forged release of the trust is a criminal matter, she said. Forgery, fraud, misappropriation of fiduciary assets. Beyond that, the pattern of conduct inside the company supports a civil claim for breach of partnership agreement that has been building for years. She folded her hands. Your uncle has been waiting to move on this because he wanted to give your father an opportunity to do the right thing privately. That opportunity has now been exhausted. What happens next? I asked. She looked at me steadily. There is a shareholder meeting scheduled for January 14th. All major investors in Merit Industrial, along with federal contracting officers, will be present. It has been on the calendar for 6 months. She paused. Your uncle intends to present these findings at that meeting. Publicly, he would like you to be there. I thought about my father sitting at his dinner table while I froze on the porch steps. I thought about every time I had struggled and he had watched without offering a hand. I thought about Patricia's face when she pointed at the door. I'll be there, I said. I stayed at the hotel for the 2 weeks between New Year's and the shareholder meeting. Cole paid for everything and refused to discuss it when I tried to bring it up. On the 3rd day, he had clothes delivered that fit me, good ones. Nothing flashy, but solid and well-made. The kind of clothing that says you belong in a room without announcing it. We had dinner together most evenings. He talked about my grandfather, stories I had never heard, the early years of the company, the long drives between job sites, the old man's habit of keeping a thermos of black coffee and a paperback novel in the truck at all times. Hearing about my grandfather from someone who had loved him without complication was something I hadn't realized I was hungry for. He talked about you, Cole said one night, in the last year of his life. He kept saying he wanted to see you one more time before he went. Your father kept saying he'd arrange it. He never did. I looked at my coffee cup. I didn't know he was sick until after he passed. My father told me it happened fast. Cole was quiet for a moment. He was sick for 14 months. I nodded slowly. I had suspected that. Somehow, I had always suspected that. On the 8th day, something changed. Renata came to the room early in the morning with a look on her face that was carefully neutral in a way that meant something was wrong. She told me that someone had called Harriet's office the previous afternoon claiming to be my legal representative and requesting copies of the forensic document analysis. The request had been declined, but the call had been traced to a cell phone registered to a business called PRC Consulting. PRC Consulting shared an address with one of my father's holding companies. He knew we were building a case. He'll move to discredit you before the meeting, Cole said, sitting at the room's small table with his hands around his coffee mug. He'll call you unstable. He'll say you have a history of making false claims. He'll try to get in front of the story. Does he have anything to use? Renata asked, looking at me directly and without apology. I thought about my 20s. The apartment I'd lost. The job I'd been laid off from. The 2 years I'd spent working construction after the company I'd been with folded. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. Just a regular life made harder than it should have been. Nothing real, I said. Real doesn't always matter when it's deployed fast enough, Cole said. We move up the timeline. We go into that meeting with everything in order before he has time to build a counter-narrative. He looked at Harriet, who had come in behind Renata. How soon can we be ready? Harriet's glasses caught the morning light. We're ready now, she said. The Merit Industrial shareholder meeting was held in a conference facility on the top floor of the company's Denver headquarters. A building I had driven past dozens of times without knowing my grandfather had built what was inside it. The room held 46 people, investors, federal contracting officers, 3 members of the company's independent audit committee, and a row of legal representatives along the far wall. Long windows looked out over the city, the mountains just visible through the January haze. I walked in beside Cole. My father was already seated at the main table. When he saw me, the color left his face in a single moment. The way water drains from a glass when the bottom falls out. He recovered quickly, the way people do who have spent years managing their expressions. But I had seen it. The moment was real, and I held on to it. Patricia was seated 2 chairs down from him. Derek was not there. My father had brought 2 attorneys. Cole opened the meeting himself, formally and without drama, thanking everyone for their time. Then he turned the floor over to Harriet. She was not theatrical. She did not raise her voice or use dramatic pauses. She simply laid out the facts the way you would describe the weather, precise and without embellishment. She presented the will, the trust documents, the financial records, the forensic handwriting analysis, the account trail showing where the trust funds had moved. Each document appeared on the screen behind her as she referenced it. The contracting officers leaned forward. The audit committee members exchanged glances and said nothing. My father sat very still. When Harriet finished, my father's lead attorney stood immediately and began to speak. He used words like alleged and disputed and unverified. He suggested the analysis was commissioned by a party with a financial interest in the outcome. He was smooth and prepared and said absolutely nothing that changed a single document on that screen. Then Cole turned to me. "I'd like Ethan to speak," he said simply. I stood. I hadn't prepared remarks. I had thought about it and decided against it because what I wanted to say didn't need preparation. I had been carrying it for a long time. "I grew up in this company's shadow without knowing it," I said. "I spent years struggling. $42 in my wallet on New Year's Eve. A truck in the shop I couldn't fix. I thought that was just my life. I thought I had made wrong choices, fallen short, ended up on the wrong side of things because of something in me." I looked around the room. There was $4 million set aside for me by my grandfather. I never saw a cent of it. Not because I didn't qualify, not because the trust failed, because someone in this room signed my name on a document and took it. The room was very quiet. I looked at my father then. He was looking at the table. "I'm not here because I want revenge," I said. "I'm here because my grandfather built something real and it deserves to be run honestly. I'm here because the truth was buried and it shouldn't stay that way." I sat down. For a moment nobody spoke. Then one of the federal contracting officers cleared her throat and said she had several questions for the audit committee. The attorney on my father's side began shuffling papers. My father put his hand flat on the table in front of him, steadying himself. Harriet stepped back to the podium. "Given the evidence presented today," she said, "we are formally requesting a suspension of your father's signatory authority pending a full forensic audit of all company accounts going back 6 years. Additionally, we are filing a criminal complaint with the Denver DA's office this afternoon regarding the forged trust release documents." She looked at my father's attorney without blinking. "Your client may wish to consult with counsel about his options." My father pushed back his chair. He tried to speak, and what came out was not a sentence. Patricia put her hand on his arm, and he shook it off. For a moment, he stood there at the head of that table, in the company his father had built, surrounded by people who had just watched the architecture of his deceit get laid out on a projection screen, and he looked exactly like what he was. A man who had run out of room. 2 of the contracting officers were already on their phones when security escorted him to the elevator. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing about dismantling a lie that has been built over years is simple. There were depositions and document requests and days when Harriet's office was more familiar to me than the hotel room. The forensic audit uncovered what everyone had expected it to uncover, and a few things nobody had. My father's attorney negotiated. My father, facing criminal exposure he could not talk his way out of, eventually agreed to a settlement that restored my trust in full with interest, and surrendered his remaining ownership stake in the company. Derek called me once. He said he'd had no idea. I believed him about 60%. We agreed to talk again someday, and both of us understood that someday might be a very long time from now. Patricia did not call. The criminal charges moved forward regardless of the civil settlement, because that is not how the law works, despite what my father apparently believed. Forgery, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. The proceedings were ongoing, and I made peace with the fact that they would take the time they took. What I had was already more than I'd had on New Year's Eve, sitting on those porch steps. Cole offered me a position in the company. Not a ceremonial title, not a favor. An actual role, learning the operational side, the way he had learned it beside my grandfather, starting at the level where the work was done and moving up by understanding it. I said yes, not because of the money, because it felt like the first door in a long time that opened instead of closed. On a Saturday in late February, Cole took me to visit my grandfather's grave in a small cemetery in Lakewood. There was snow on the ground and the headstone was simple, just a name and 2 dates and the word builder underneath, which had been my grandfather's own request. I stood there for a while without saying anything. Cole stood beside me and didn't say anything either, and that felt exactly right. I thought about the thermos of black coffee, the paperback novels, the drive between job sites in a truck that smelled like lumber and canvas, a man who set aside $4 million for a 7-year-old grandson because he loved him without condition and wanted him to have a foundation to stand on, who never got to say goodbye because his son kept finding reasons to postpone the visit. I thought about my mother, who had died when I was 4, and whose memory my father had managed as carefully as he managed everything else, releasing only the pieces that served the image he wanted to project. Some things could not be recovered, but I had stopped trying to build myself on top of a version of the past that someone else had edited. Whatever my mother had been, she had been real. Whatever she had felt about me had been real. The 4-year-old she had held was real. No amount of management changed that. I put my hand on my grandfather's headstone for a moment, and then I stepped back. He would have liked you, Cole said, the man you are now. I thought about New Year's Eve. The cold porch, the locked door, the $42. I'm still figuring out the man I am now, I said. Cole smiled, the first time I'd seen him smile fully. That's the right answer, he said. By spring, I had moved into an apartment in Denver with large windows that looked west toward the mountains. I had a truck that ran. I had a job that asked real things of me and trusted me with real responsibility. I had an uncle who was teaching me the work my grandfather had loved. On the last day of March, I sat at my desk in the Merritt Industrial Building and looked out at the city for a long time. Somewhere across Denver, my father was in a process that would not be comfortable and would not be fast. I did not feel triumphant about that. I did not feel broken either. I felt like someone who had finally been handed the right map after years of navigating by guesswork. Still a long walk ahead, but at least now walking in the right direction. I thought about the version of myself sitting on those frozen steps on New Year's Eve, watching his family celebrate through a lit window, telling himself this was just how things were. I wanted to tell him something. I wanted to say, a black SUV is about to come up the driveway. Get in. The truth about your family is going to cost you something. The grief of it is real and it does not disappear on a timeline anyone gets to set for you. But on the other side of it is something no one can forge a signature and take away from you. Something your grandfather understood when he built this company from nothing. The work is yours. The name is yours. The life is yours. If you're here listening to this, I want to ask you something. Just let me know you're still with me. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. I read everyone. Because the reason I share this story is not for sympathy and not for drama. It's because I know there are people sitting on cold porch steps right now, in one form or another, watching through a window at a warmth they've been told they don't deserve. You deserve to know the door can open. My name is Ethan Merritt. That name was almost taken from me, and this is not the end of my story. It's the first page of the one I get to write myself.